Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the February 13th Water Resources Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Spiro Mitrakostas. I am stepping in as temporary chair for the meeting. And the first thing I'd like to do is call the roll, see if we can establish a quorum. Let's see, who do we have online first? Lee Rowley here. Mary Craig.
Here.
Here.
John DeLiso.
Yeah.
Here in person. George Perkins.
Here.
Any other members in attendance? Okay, and Spiro Mitrakostas. That makes a quorum, so we can proceed with the agenda for the night, for the afternoon. First up is project update. Who's available to do that?
Lou's on remotely, as far as the OPM.
And
Good
Lou-
afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Lou, for those who are at home, is identified as Matt Pitta, not the.
No, Lou
No?
Regazzino, the
Okay.
OPM.
No, I'm.
Oh, I see.
should be
you're-
online. Okay.
I just was reading the name underneath it. Lou, feel free to start.
All right. So regarding the OPM progress status, since the last meeting, it's been fairly quiet. We're waiting on the next submissions from the design engineer, CDM Smith. The 90% design of the collection system is anticipated to be submitted towards the end of this week. We are still waiting on some decisions from Mass DEP on the groundwater permit. I believe Mike's going to give us an update on that. And then the 60% design on the water resource recovery facility is not due until March 22nd. So currently from the OPM status, we'll waiting on the 90% submission, and we'll be working with the staff and CDM Smith on the review of those documents until such time the 60% design comes in.
Just started the OPM review.
That's all I have for this meeting, Mr. Chairman.
For those who are observing, Bob Rittenauer has entered the room and is attending the meeting now.
This is left for the building. Sorry, I'm late.
Generally speaking, Lou, is this in keeping with the schedule that you've drawn, that were originally put out and we're sort of following now? Any delays anticipated in reaching those completion goals?
Yeah, actually on the back of the progress report that I believe Mary made some copies for me to hand out, you'll see there is the design contract schedule, and those dates are consistent with the schedule which the designer provided to us, you know, back when we started here in September, October. And the biggest goal is really contract 2 and 3, which Mike and his team are aiming to get out to bid advertisement in April.
So we're noticing some of these dates are, we're starting to bump up against some of these days, March, April. You mentioned the February date, so you're confident that we're going to be meeting those. Is this something that our local staff or DPW director works with you on to make sure that, at least on our end, we're able to help you accomplish these deadlines?
Yeah, absolutely. What we've done in the past during the last submission was we've reviewed the submittals independently. And then we've held a workshop both on January 10th and a subsequent meeting on January 26th to review those comments with the design team and staff to make sure we were all in concurrence with the comments that were being made, and in particular, some of the potential cost savings that were presented to both the OPM and the staff. So those have resulted in some significant cost reductions to the project that we're hoping to carry through into the design and bidding and construction, I should say.
Just to be clear, cost reduction estimates. That's correct. Is that correct?
That is, it is.
Okay. Any questions for Lou or Jeff for that matter? Okay. Can we move on? Design update for the facility, the plant, and the collection system. Is that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Judici from CDM Smith. We're going to give you a quick overview update on the status of the design for the treatment plant and the collection system. It's only been a couple of weeks since we met last, so not a whole lot of new information to report other than we're on both fronts pushing ahead aggressively to get the designs done to meet the schedule. So Matt Pitt is actually on the line. Matt's going to walk through the you should have some slides in your packet. I heard we have a second Matt Pitter.
Yeah, there's two.
Laura's just telling. So CDM Smith's Matt Pitter is on the line to talk about the treatment plant.
Hey everybody, it's the less famous Matt Pitta. I appreciate everyone's time. As Mike said, and Lou as well, not a lot of updates necessarily on the water resource recovery facility. That's not to say that we're not working hard on driving this thing to meet the 60% deliverable. I wouldn't say that there's much that has changed in the past few weeks in terms of direction or anything like that. Continue to work hard to get this over to the town and the OPM on March 22nd. If you are a good note taker, you might notice that last time around we had 3/14 on the slide. That's an internal date that we're driving for, and I swapped that in accidentally, but it is a 3/22 submittal to, again, the town and the OPM. Happy to answer any questions on the water resource recovery facility.
Committee? Just as a general question, what happens on March 22nd?
Sure.
Just
Hopefully before then,
big
but certainly
fires.
on that date,
just
we will
confetti?
upload.
What happens?
Fireworks.
Not yet. We're getting there. We get one step closer to confetti, I think.
Well, when you say 60% completion, there's a action that happens at that point. Somebody gets notified, or you all get together and kind of nod in concurrence. What happens?
And Matt can expand upon this, but just during the design process, there are typically, design milestones that are typical for these types of projects, 30, 60, 90, and then obviously 100%, which is ready to bid. So that's one of the milestones that we had included in the schedule, and it's basically a transfer of the status of the design at that point. So there'll be a new set of design drawings and specifications transmitted electronically to the town and to the OPM, so staff and OPM can start their review at that stage.
And cost, that's
And
another
costs.
piece. It's very important.
Correct. So that'll
Updated cost.
be an updated cost on the treatment plant at that time as well.
When will we be 100%?
3 years after completion.
No,
I think it was like February 24, is that right?
So actually, if you look on the, I wasn't 100% certain, Jeff. Matt obviously knows these dates, I'm
It'll be
sure.
November.
Memory. If you look on the back, item 5 on the back of the OPM update, there's, as Lou indicated, design contract schedule. So if you look under, contract 1 is the water resource recovery facility. So we're showing 100% design at the end of October of this year. So at that point, it would be put out to bid. Matt, maybe you can walk through the process in terms of, those, the treatment plant's a little bit different than the collection system. It's bid because it's a Chapter 149, so there'll be filed sub-bids and whatnot, so it's a much longer bidding process. So Matt, I'm not sure
Sure.
what the goal is for having actual general bids in hand.
So when we have town meeting, what's the projected percentage of completion of design?
So that's that 60% that you'll be getting at the end, toward the end of March. So for the treatment plant anyway, there'll be a 60% design cost estimate based on the 60% design. On the collection system, we're going to have a couple of the contracts bid, so those will have bids in hand, and then estimates on the remaining contracts, and we can talk about that.
I'm concerned with a potential gap between what we vote at town meeting and reality.
As we all are, John. Yes, no, we understand, and yeah, it's just a function of the schedule when the design was started. We're pushing aggressively, as we said, to get the treatment plant design as far along as possible, and just the way the schedule laid out, 60% as far as we were going to be able to get the design prior to town meeting.
So it's based on a pretty detailed design.
Correct.
So it's similar to what many people might remember, a school project where there isn't a bid in hand. We've done many recent projects for the town of Yarmouth, much smaller, of course, with bids in hand, the DPW building, a number of water projects. That won't be the case for this one, but it'll be much more like a school project where there's a detailed design number, and that's the number we're managing the entire project to. And that number is $207,244,000. And that's the number that'll be the article in town meeting, and that's the number we're managing the project to. That is both the treatment facility as well as the collection system.
So John picked up on something I thought we were heading in the same direction. My concern was more that you're going to go to town meeting with a 60% design completion and an estimate, which may scare some folks, because we may end up being higher when it comes time to look at a final design.
And he said, in terms of the treatment plant, that is where the design will be. And there are construction contingencies built into the cost estimate that are reflective of the status and level of the design.
Any questions from the board? Questions from anyone else in the room, if you don't mind? Mike?
Okay.
Just anticipating your next meeting, which might be in 2 weeks, do you think there might be a revision to this schedule in the next couple of weeks?
A revision to the schedule? We don't anticipate that, no. Nope. So I could give you a quick overview of the collection system status as well?
Yeah, please do.
Absolutely. So a couple of milestones. We had talked before about the geotechnical drilling program. So we're required to drill, to determine the soil conditions and groundwater level along the alignment of the collection system. So in order to do that, we actually drilled over 100 borings. So those were completed last week. At the 2 pumping station locations, we drilled to 50 feet and actually installed groundwater monitoring wells so that we can monitor groundwater prior to construction and during. We've made a couple of submittals to the Conservation Commission earlier this month. We had to submit a notice of intent for Pumping Station 5, PS5. That's the one located down on South Shore Drive. That falls under CONCOM jurisdiction. And then we filed a request for determination of applicability, an RDA, for the rest of the project. So all of Contract 2, including that pumping station, and all the pipeline work in Contract 3. So those are all included in a submittal made earlier this month to Conservation Commission. It puts us on the schedule for their hearing on March 2nd. So we'll will appear before the Conservation Commission, hopefully get those public hearings closed, and then a notice of intent, order of conditions issued on the notice of intent for Pumping Station 5, and presumably, hopefully, a negative determination for the RDA for the rest of the project. Working on the MassDOT permit, that should be submitted within the next few days. We've also been spending time meeting with both town staff, and we have a meeting tomorrow with town council. We submitted what we call our boilerplate specifications. So that's basically the procurement portion of the contract documents that we'll be putting out to bid for the collection system. So we had a meeting on Friday with procurement staff and town staff, and a meeting tomorrow with town council to get any comments they have. A lot of that document is dictated by DEP as part of the SRF program, so we don't have a lot of leeway in terms of what can and can't be changed, but looking to get town council to sign off on the document so that we can proceed to bid. And as Lou had mentioned, we've got a submittal at the end of this week, the 90%. So that'll be 90% plans and specs on the collection system contracts 2 and 3. And then we'll follow up early next week with the 90%, updated 90% cost estimate as well for the collection system. So we're pushing toward advertising. We'll have to work with town staff, Jeff and his staff, to come up with specific dates, but we're targeting late March to put the contracts out to bid so that we'll have bids in hand prior to town meeting. So we're shooting for early to mid-April to have our contract 2 and contract 3 bids in hand. Any questions on the collection system?
1 sec. Could you remind us when town meeting is? April?
April 25.
5th?
Okay, so potentially we're advertising for bids prior to town meeting?
That's the, yes, we're shooting. So what we intend to do, we would typically do in this situation, it will stagger the 2 contracts by a week. So we typically have a 2-week bidding period for projects of this type. So we'll stagger them a week apart so that, you know, the town and the bidders can see how the bids came in on the first project, and they can make any adjustments that they feel are necessary for the second one. And we find that that actually drives the prices down because the contractors see what everyone else is bidding on the first one and realize what they have to do to make adjustments to potentially win the second contract. So that's the plan at this point.
I had a quick question, Mike, on that.
Yeah.
The SRF, are you allowed to issue contracts in excess of, you know how they have their 50 million per year max project that, I mean, my assumption is how it works is that if it's 50 million max on a $200 million project, they'll, you know, just go 50 million a year until they get to the whole 200. And I'm just wondering, does that impact our schedule to release contracts? And the big one would be the plant, which
Correct.
that has a, you know, there's a 2-year construction period, but you'd have to get, I guess, their okay to release the whole contract.
And they recognize that. That's built into their program. And when we get to that point, we'll have to put together a cash flow for all of these contracts in terms of how the funds will be reimbursed over the life of the contract for both the collection system and the treatment plant. That's part of the process with the DEP and the SRF program. So they do that for all of their projects so that they can do their financing on their end as well. But certainly, you know, the $200 million or the $100 million contract or whatever the treatment plan ends up coming in at, you'll have the ability to execute that contract, and DEP recognizes that's multi-year, so
Right,
that
even if
that
they
doesn't.
haven't committed their
Correct.
subsequent 50 millions, we're going to issue those
Correct.
contracts. and-
Yeah, they have to allow you to execute the contract. That it's more than that's a yearly cap that they put on the communities, And in talking to them, they said, it's very rare to see any community, even communities that are building, large treatment plants, to expend more than $50 million in a given year. And we may be in a different situation with both the collection system and the treatment plant. We'll have to see, obviously, where the numbers come in and how the cash flow lays out. But that's the feedback we've received from them. So they'll work with the town to make it work. They're not going to tell you can't execute the contract because it might.
Yeah, I'm at the point
see
where
them
I'm
there.
staying up at night trying to think of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, that's what we all do.
I think on that SRF thing, we probably gotta, prior to getting into town meeting, a meeting with them so that we can answer people's questions on the overall SRF world.
Yeah, we had a call with them a few weeks ago, and I asked that, and they're certainly more than happy to set up a meeting with town staff to walk through. I'm sure you have much more detailed and specific questions than we pose to them, so that, we can set that up for you. That's not a problem.
Bob, you may have segued into the next slide. You want to advance the show?
Yep. So just a quick update on permitting and the regulatory end. Again, not much has changed here. DEP has not issued the final intended use plan. That's typically out sometime in February, so that may be coming in the next few weeks. We've started work on the SRF application that needs to go in for the town for this program. So that's part of the process and part of the discussion we had with DEP, because one of the main pieces of the SRF application is town meeting approval for the funding of the program. So they can't actually sign off on the town's program until the funding is approved. So when we bid the collection system projects, we'll be bidding them, they call it at risk, because you're not going to have SRF approval because you could be missing that piece of the funding approval from town meeting. And that's okay, they understand that. What will happen is after town meeting, if the article does pass, then they'll issue a permission to advertise, which is part of their normal process, as well as authorization to award the actual contract based on the bid. So it just works a little bit differently because of the timing and the way town meeting lays out, but we can't submit the full application. We'll get as much of it in as we can prior so that they can review it, but the last piece that they'll need, one of the last pieces, is the funding approval.
Approval. Now, do they have specific requirements that have to go into that article? I'm more familiar with the general, bond obligation language, but this is more specialized.
There is some language, and we shared some examples with Jeff, and I can try to find some more, but it just has to be a reference to the trust that, authorizes the town to, take a loan from the trust, and there's some other language. And right.
Put a draft together for you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yep. And we can pass that through DEP as well, to get them to sign off on it prior to town meeting, to make sure they agree that it includes the language that's required. I would
Yeah,
recommend
I have
that.
the draft,
Okay,
and so I'll work with all you guys on that. We'll make sure that bond counsel gets a swing at it too, so everyone's happy.
Yep. And then when it's ready, yeah, we can send it into DEP to have them give it a quick look over as well. Yeah, the last thing you want to have happen, not have the required language in the article.
Oh, we forgot that comma. Oh,
That's right.
well,
That's
that's
right.
only a couple $100 million.
That's right.
We're okay on DEP here? Can you speak to the 208 consistency review? Did I
Yes,
miss
actually-
something? This would have been issued before our last meeting. Did it come up
So
at the last
this
meeting?
was on the last, yeah, again, not much, it was just 2 weeks ago, so we did have that letter in hand. We just kept it on here so people were reminded that we're through that process. We're working with DEP on the groundwater discharge permit. We had a meeting a few weeks ago. We're putting together a memo to send back. We've had a number of memos go back and forth. So this latest one will address their latest comments, and hopefully we're getting closer to closing that out as well. And then the final item was the land use controls. I think this committee has seen that draft version some time ago. We submitted that to DEP for their review as well. Once they approve it, then it'll have to go to the Board of Selectmen for them to actually approve it.
I will stand to be corrected. Did this committee actually see the land use controls drafts?
You did. It was in a packet probably in the fall. It was in, it was an agenda item as well. There was not a lot of discussion about that. It really, if you, and we can certainly put it in your next packet if you'd like, but it had the ultimate flow at build-out, which for us is 3.54 million gallons a day. And then it had by phase the flows to be managed in each of the phases. So that's really what is the crux of what DEP, what the state is reviewing, is to make sure that you're managing to a specific flow. And that's also important as a design concept, that we're building a treatment plant and sizing collection system piping to meet that flow as well. So it was a pretty simple document. It was maybe 3 pages, something like that. But the key piece was the chart at the end that had by phases the flows that we were managing to. And those are build-out flows.
Okay, so for anyone who has that question, it's in our notes, it's in our files. We can go look for it. It might come up again at another meeting.
We can send it out again as well, but yeah, I can't remember the date, but I know.
Just wondering if it's going to be part of a town meeting discussion or not, and should we be making sure that as much of this information is out there and available, as opposed to, by the way, there's land use controls go along with this?
Certainly, and again, it's something that needs to be signed off on by the Board of Selectmen as well.
I remember
So
what
the-
Jeff's talking about
so
now.
the-
I thought it may have been more detailed than that.
It's not. It's pretty general.
It's
yeah.
Any questions for Mike? If you don't mind, I'm going to hold a cost discussion because it seems like we're on the regulatory permitting topic at the moment anyways. Does anyone wanted to speak to that? Is that Jeff? Is that you, or is this?
I think the
who's
primary.
actually, sorry to interrupt, but who's actually handling applying for permits for the town of Yarmouth's plant?
We are, CDM Smith
Okay,
is,
so
and
you
that
got-
was essentially that last slide that I just
Right.
walked through. So that's the update. It's a separate item on your agenda, but it's part of our
Okay,
update.
so
So we don't have anything further above and
I'm
beyond
just
what.
wondering where I should be
Yep.
expecting
No,
an answer
no,
from.
we-
But if we're sort of hitting our marks here as we're moving along, is this something that DEP would look at when you would get a 208 consistency letter? Are we passing it along to somebody? Because
That'll-
it seems as if we're in this kind of strange discussion with DEP through the media that what we're proposing isn't consistent with what they're requesting. But there is a plan in place. It's been in place now for almost 8 years to approach remediation of this issue this way. So is that something that they're going to look at and say, thanks, okay, and put over here? Or are we, is everybody bound by this process?
So that letter from the commission will be included in the SRF application that I indicated we'd be working on earlier. So that's a pretty robust document that has lots of attachments and requirements. So we'll include the MEPA certificate on the comprehensive wastewater management plan and the notice of project change, as well as the 208 consistency review letter from the Cape Cod Commission. It's a whole series of documents that they require us to submit so that they can check all their boxes on their checklist to make sure we've met all their requirements.
Okay. Any word, Jeff, from DEP on the regulations they've been promulgating and contemplating? Hearings
No.
are closed.
The short,
Testimony's in.
right.
The senators have threatened them. Now what happens next?
Yeah, the short answer is no, and I suspect that because of the amount of feedback they've gotten, they're going to take their time in making sure that they do it properly. But no, we haven't heard back, and I don't know what the time frame is specifically.
So they're going to issue them on July 3rd, as we all go off for the weekend. And, be able to, The reason I ask is because this process is moving faster than the regulatory process. I personally am in favor of just moving ahead and waiting for the regulations to catch up. That's why I asked this question a couple of weeks ago. Is there something that we're not going to be able to do without those regulations are in place, without those regulations being in place? So we want to build a sewer system, we can build a sewer system.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
And we're in compliance with DEP, and we've been working with them for a long time. I mean, the only thing in the regulations that really would cause any degree of pause for us is that they would like to have a more aggressive time frame than our CWMP. And I think that that would be a matter of funding. But even if the regulations were promulgated as they're proposed, what they're saying is communities that have recent CWMPs will have an opportunity to present that information in our request to get a watershed permit. What they're looking for is communities to adopt a watershed permit. And when you have a watershed permit, that stays, this requirement. Otherwise, that individuals would have to install these alternative and innovative septic systems. But communities that have, within 5 years, I think, the watershed permit, don't have to do that. And so I think the only thing that's left, and they're discussing whether, they can even promulgate those rules as they propose them, but the only thing that's left is our discussion with them is the CWMP timeframe versus what they would like to see, which would be a 20-year timeframe for 75%, which we probably wouldn't be able to meet without additional funding. But it's really not determined. So, it's unfortunate that the DEP is even looking at regulations immediately prior to our implementation. But, while we're continuing strong discussions with them, it would be extremely foolish to change what our schedule is, to change the high degree of progress. And in fact, I think if we can get phase 1 off the ground, it puts us in a much better position to talk to the DEP. If you read in the popular press what the interest groups are saying, they'd like to make the argument that towns are trying to delay. And I think that the only way that you can answer those types of complaints is not to delay. And we've had our program, it's everyone and their brother in Boston has a copy of the book on their desk. I'm sure it's their #1 reading, and they've all approved it.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I
I'd
have-
just like to add, as you alluded to, Bob, regardless of whether it's a 40-year time frame or a 20-year time frame, you have to start with phase 1. It has to start somewhere, right? And they can argue about phases 2 through 8, that those should happen quicker, but you're getting phase 1 out as quickly as possible and moving forward, and until the resource recovery facility is built, you can't sewer anywhere. So that's the first step, and the town is being proactive and moving forward.
I happen to concur with the town manager. We should just keep moving forward and wait for them to catch up. My concern is that folks, lay people for the most part, are always looking for an analogy to make it understandable. And that's what we encounter when we go out to these public meetings. And, you can hurry up and build a house, but you can't occupy it without an occupancy permit, right? You can't turn on the water unless you get, a sanitary permit or a permit from the Board of Health. So we're going to be moving ahead, and I know this is a 2 or 3 year lag because it takes that long to build a plant, but at some point, we're going to be applying for a permit that we're going to need to be able to turn on the system, right? So we're hoping that they'll catch up to us by then. Anything else on the horizon, regulatory speaking?
No?
Can I, as a point of sort of privilege of the chair, I remember seeing a town selectmen's meeting where one of the selectmen, who happens to also be our county commissioner, was talking about the reinvigoration of the wastewater collaborative for Barnstable County. On that sort of footing, is there anything that's happening intermunicipally? Anybody else sort of in the same position we are? Are we comparing notes with anybody? Or is there, in fact, maybe going to be a chance to do that formally in a collaborative?
Well, I don't think the collaborative, as it was initially constituted, is going to be, handling this issue. I think that the towns, I can tell you that I had a meeting of all of the town managers on Cape Cod last Thursday to review the DEP regulations and the status, and we've held regular meetings, and we're in very strong communication, and we'll continue to do so. Right now, we're, most closely aligned, I would say, with the issues going on in Barnstable, which is the largest town in Cape Cod. We're both very active in implementation, although we like to say we're very active, although we haven't actually started. We're sincere in our preparations. And, that there's a lot of issues associated with funding, with the draft regulations, but we're talking very closely with the other towns. And there's an additional meeting this Wednesday with Cape Cod towns and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to talk about these issues. So we're having an ongoing series of discussions. They're not happening through the so-called Cape Cod Water Collaborative that was a quasi-agency of the county. In fact, I saw their former director had a lot of things, to say in as a special interest group in the newspaper. Even yesterday, in the Cape Cod Times, they had a full-page ad about what town officials mean when they say all of these terrible things, and things I've never heard anyone say. But suffice to say, the communication among the towns is ongoing and strong, and we have the Commonwealth tied in there as well, working through the governor's office. And we have requested that the DEP sort of sit tight on their regulations until we work out some of the details between them. But again, I would reiterate that by starting the implementation, I think it puts the town in a much stronger position to continue to look after our needs. I mean, the truth is, we have our wastewater plan to protect the environment. It's not a direct response to any consent orders or any requirements. We've been working on it to meet the water quality standards, which we've identified, working through the MEP program. So, that's what's driving us. And, we do know that's an emerging area for regulation of the DEP. And I think you said it the best, is that I think their process will catch up with our process, and we'll be moving on together. But at this point, I don't foresee, nor do I anticipate any major breaks or problems with the DEP. We've been working with the DEP hand in glove since the start, and we're going to continue to. We've got some questions about their draft regulations, but I think that they've been largely created by some of the special interest groups around the issue that have come forward. But it is both ironic, I think, and interesting as well that you marked that major milestone, the Cape Cod Commission's 208 consistency review. Now, that was a review that was initially initiated as a settlement discussions of litigation with the Conservation Law Foundation. And that was something that was worked out, with the help of the courts to resolve those issues. So last I heard, that the Conservation Law Foundation was very proud of the 208 consistency planning process and certification, and I should think they'd be very, very delighted with Yarmouth to see us reach that consistency designation. So, hope that positivity continues.
I agree.
Don't read the newspaper.
I don't suppose they're going to send us a thank you note, but they probably are noticing that we're moving faster than most towns. My question was really regarding anybody else moving at this pace? Anybody else going to town meeting this year? Town managers, I hadn't even thought about that being probably the best platform for this discussion. Maybe the DPW directors can get together and compare notes as well. But all of us,
Barnstone's moving forward, they're going for some funding, and you know, it's interesting, another town that was sort of going a little slower has decided to increase their speed and ramp up is the town of Sandwich. They've sort of announced that, you know, they're going to be making some major applications to combine phases and try to move them ahead quicker to kind of stay above the curve. So, you know, if their intention was to get the attention of the different towns and have them look closely at their efforts, I think they've been successful. But I honestly don't see the regulations. It's kind of difficult because the towns are all at different places in, you know, the planning process. And when you get to Yarmouth, DEP has said over and over that they're very satisfied with the progress that we're making, and they're very supportive of it. But I think that the regulations weren't aimed at us. I think they were aimed at some of the other towns that potentially might not be making the progress we're making. But that still puts us in a difficult position because now, you know, we're going to have to negotiate our way through it every step, because now the area that we're involved in is going to be heavily regulated, where before, you know, the regulations just had the CWMP and the consistency review. Now they have the actual regulations of the DEP that they want to issue permits for us to even plan. So I think that, you know, honestly, it's been a very complicated and vexing problem to stay on track with everyone, but I honestly don't see the DEP as a major threat to the town. They're, you know, they're a partner, and I think the only thing that is kind of tough right now, it would be nice to see more state funding being forthcoming. I think that would help our residents tremendously, and it would help our schedule. But as we reviewed last meeting, our plan is sound for phase one based on just the SRF program, the way it's currently constituted. So we'll be able to move forward without any additional help.
any questions from the board on this topic? Can we move on to number?
Just one question. We've had this one before, it's sort of a past comment, where our SRF is ranked number 1, and I've said, by who?
DEP.
Yeah, I think we should add that up there, if people look at that it's been ranked by DEP.
And me as well.
Yeah, well, says it's great.
All you're doing is making yourself a target.
Yeah. And then,
Can we be ranked number 2? Is that okay?
Yeah, I know.
we try harder.
Let them go after the other guy first.
And the groundwater discharge permit, that's been approved by DEP?
It has not. We're working through that process. We've had a number of phone calls and emails with them. They have additional comments that we're addressing via a memo.
Are we close?
Hopefully
Are we
next week.
close to
We're getting close, yes.
Doesn't that beg the question, can they issue a groundwater discharge permit while they're still figuring out what the regulations are?
I would assume, yeah, I mean, it's all sorts of proposed regulations all over the place, so, you know, the government doesn't come to a screeching halt, I wouldn't think, waiting for potential regulations to get promulgated,
Okay.
so town has to keep moving forward.
I'm not sure what the agenda item pertains to here, DEP's nitrogen-sensitive regulation. Is this on?
What we were just talking about and the town's response letter, I think maybe that's a carryover from that.
Right, yeah, everyone saw the letter. It was finalized, and now we're gonna have additional discussions with the state. And one thing I would add that I'm not sure we talked about, whether we had a meeting since the Massachusetts Municipal Association's annual meeting in Boston, which was late in January. We actually had, and Selectman Forrest sort of set this up as well, so I give him tremendous credit. The delegation from Cape Cod had a special time allotted for a meeting with the Lieutenant Governor about the DEP nitrogen-sensitive regulations. And we expressed, the same types of concerns folks are expressing in their correspondence and that we've discussed. And Sarah Peak, one of the local Cape Cod legislators, had suggested an additional extension of the comment period, which ended January 31. Now, no decision has been made on that, but there is potential. And the second thing that was suggested that is moving forward is an additional meeting for some of the Cape Cod officials to express through the governor's office what issues and concerns that we have on the regulations. And that piece, I'm told, is moving forward. So the idea was a lot of the local selectmen and town officials at that meeting, which I attended in Boston, had expressed concern that there were supposedly stakeholders that were involved in a discussion that preceded the promulgation of the draft regulations, and the stakeholders primarily were comprised of special interest groups, but not local governments, and that the feeling was that if local governments were involved, we would have been able to express what the status of the plans were a little more clearly and potentially impacted the direction of the regulations. So what the legislators were at the meeting were asking for is, and it was one of the things behind having the additional comment period, is some type of a process that would involve local governments sitting at the table as opposed to just the special interest groups. So I think, from our standpoint, it may mean that the time frame for the publication of the regulations for approval may be delayed a little bit. And I don't see that as a bad thing, but it opens up a lot more discussions, at least, to hear from the towns prior to finalizing the regulations. And so we haven't been promised anything except some meetings that I understand are being set up.
Which is interesting, because DEP came to Yarmouth, and as part of their roadshow, going to every single town to hear comments back in the fall. We had our meeting here, and we expressed all these concerns about limits of IAs, limits and stuff like that, and they seemed to visit all the towns. They heard from a lot of the towns, but then they just still kept going with the regulations. It was like, thank you for all your comments.
Right. Well, I think what happened, Bruce, was that
Off we go.
It was like a fait accompli.
Yeah.
When they rolled them out to us in the fall,
Right.
it was done. They were drafted, and they had met with their interest groups. They had met with the Conservation Law Foundation, which seemed to be the agency that was driving. I mean, a lot of their talking points were in there, and so it wasn't a situation where the towns were being asked what they thought. It was rolling them out. Of course, made the meeting a lot happier when they said, we're going to meet to talk about this $200 million that we're putting on the table for Cape Cod wastewater. Oh, and by the way, we have these regulations we want to talk about. And then subsequent to the meeting, well, the regulations grew and the 200 million disappeared. And so.
You're challenging our faith in state government. At the time, we were also concerned that they were asking us to apply for a watershed permit. I think they had mentioned 20 years as a time frame. Even at that point, it was fairly early in the process. And our major concern was, are we going to need 3 permits? Which technically we still do, unless they're figuring out how to create master permits in the process, which would be nice for the town of Falmouth. But I don't think for us applying for 3 watershed permits is a burden.
Based upon what they've, laid out, I think it'd be relatively straightforward. In our comments, as the, committee's well aware, we'd like them to consider our comprehensive wastewater management plan as our permit. But if they push us to do watershed permits, it's really not a heavy lift. It's one that we can
Okay.
certainly work with neighboring communities if that's what they're pushing for Bass River, Dennis, and Lewis Bay with Barnstable, and of course Parker's River is on our own. So I don't know that we need a special agreement with ourselves, but we, certainly,
No, I see value in watershed permits because it requires that cooperation with whoever's part of that watershed to accomplish the reductions. Otherwise, you're off doing your thing and your partner's not, and then you get whacked because they didn't mitigate quick enough or sufficiently enough. I'm just making sure we educate along the way during these meetings so everybody who's listening in can sort of keep up with where we're at. So this nitrogen sensitive regulation is an official term we're going to be using for what's coming down the pike? I mean, kind of expressed my ignorance a second ago saying, what are we talking about here? This is what we're talking about. The regulations being promulgated by DEP. Great. We can now go back to the cost discussion. Guessing we don't have access to the slides that were presented at the last meeting for today's meeting. We didn't plan for it, so they're not here, although there was a fantastic budget program budget slide, which had the breakdown of the 10 different sources of revenue that we would be looking to help finance phase one. I would have liked to have had it up in case anybody has any discussions. I don't know if we need to.
Put it up. I have to log in, we'd have to log out of here, and if you log into me, it's on my desktop.
Didn't mean to have you do that as much as if there's going to be questions, that would be a great reference to have. It was slide number 29 in your PowerPoint last time. It was almost the last one.
Got the pie chart? There's one that had the pie.
No, it's just
chart
a-
both ways, yeah.
Just the list.
I think the big part of the cost discussion is just to make sure that we're clear on what
Yeah.
that total number looks like. But that pie chart certainly was very helpful in where the funding sources were going to be coming from. And there's been some ongoing refinement of, those funding sources, tweaking the numbers. But, Bob had a great slide in there that showed that at the end of the day, there was a surplus in the funding formula between all those funding sources. And that's the important message to get out.
Yeah, once we ramp up into it, I think for phase one, the financing model is sound. And
As an agenda item, it's open for discussion. Anyone wants to ask a question, particularly if they've had enough time since the last meeting to look at the detail?
And, I mean, the only thing I would press again that folks should really understand, and I appreciate you suggesting this particular chart that be put up here. It's an expensive project, and folks are concerned that the overall cost is affordable. And I think the financial model that the town selected by having 11 or so different funding sources, making complete use of the town's short-term rental income, as opposed to spending it on other things, devoting that towards wastewater, it creates a scenario whereby the largest funding source, right, of the 11 different funding sources is really the Clean Water Trust for Cape Cod, which comes in at, roughly 25% of the SRF eligible costs. And there's another one, the one that's the pie chart. See if you can find that pie chart.
It's number
Because
20. It's the other direction, 20.
Sorry, it's not PowerPoint, it's just 20?
And it shows things such as the, using the DIF to capture growth in the district. That is a portion of the property taxes, which is on there, but not a general tax increase for local residences.
It's curious.
And
Slide 20 is
the,
missing.
Betterment piece is is really only 15% of the total project cost, so
Should be on page 10 if you're looking at the right corner of your slides.
back again,
Yeah, see, page 10's not there.
18, 21.
No, you see how it's literally missing page 10 in your progression there, so. But it's a nice visual representation of this chart, basically. So you don't have to fuss too much to figure out what you're talking about. 25% are those $2 million items on there. 1, 2, 3. There's several significant sources of income, revenue we're anticipating to finance this project, and it's nice to see how big they each are. These are the specific numbers. I don't know if this is publicly available. I mean, we've made it because publicly available because we had it at a public hearing, but is there anywhere?
I think it's on the town's website right now.
Okay.
Spiro, if I might. Pertaining to costs, I've recently spoken with property owners too, in particular on Route 28, and the real question is when, on calendar date, reasonably certain, will they be able to hook up their property? And in the context of a financial planning discussion, I think it would be helpful for the town to be able to say, once we are underway, we've issued construction contracts, we have reasonably firm dates as to the completion of the collection system, and the plant becomes operational. So let's say hypothetically, we're at the end of 26, maybe 27, the town can say to the property owners, it is anticipated that by July 27, January of 28, at given addresses, should you connect your property to the trunk line, you'll be good to go. And I think business owners in particular will need that information in their financial planning to the extent that they can start to escrow funds anticipating that they'll have a reasonably large outflow. And then also, if they're on some kind of a self-imposed timeline, they're looking at a system that's 20 or 30 years old on their existing property, and they're fearful that they'll be looking at a rebuild, which is something they're going to want to avoid in the extreme. So we, the town, I think, can be very, very helpful, not only to the project writ large, to get the system operational, but be very helpful to the taxpayers, if you will, on the immediate, well, I'll call it the immediately phase one. Once we get to the other side of Parkers River, the same thing applies. So I just put that out there as, food for thought, because there is a lot of interest, in my observation, both in the commercial and in the residential neighborhoods. I have had the same conversation for 5 years in my part of town, and how fast can we get there?
For public's information, we have start dates as of today's meeting, right? So you were just sort of extrapolating out from these start dates a couple of years for completion.
Nothing like shovels in the ground.
Bruce, do you have a question?
That's a good point, because we hear, when's the sewer pipe coming by, especially from the businesses on 28, because some of them are just limping along and they're waiting for the pipe, but as Jeff mentioned, the pipe's gonna go through 28, doesn't mean they're hooking right around, because we're still building the plant. So they might see the pipe go by, but they're not ready to hook in right away.
Well, not to get too technical, you might have to wait for a bunch of connections before you actually turn on the plant as well. You can't just sort of take the first customer and treat them.
There's a process, and they actually start the plant with clean water before they, introduce the dirty
So-
water. But in any case, we've been telling people late in 2026. We'll refine those numbers, and it will depend on phases of contracts, completion of the treatment plant. All those things that you've all mentioned are all very critical. But, as far as a general target for Ability Connect late in 2026, based upon the timeframes we've been given, is a realistic expectation.
So we do mention that for phase one, but a lot of businesses on the other side of Parkers River is saying, well, how quick are we gonna get it now? And there's a lot of interest of signing up.
Well, if it's on 28, excuse me, that's still, the west side of Parkers River is still phase one as well. It's just separate contracts, not part of contracts
Right,
2 and
but it's-
3.
But
It
it's,
means
Still in
Hyannis,
that same
but
time
time-wise,
frame. Yep.
it's a little bit longer.
yeah, I mean, we lump everybody in together, Route 28, but there is a Parkers River side and there's a Hyannis Park side, which are not phase 1 and 2, which will take longer.
Yeah.
Correct.
I was just talking about along 28.
Right.
The full stretch of 28 is in phase one.
No, I'm saying, it's the further away you get from Parkers River, the longer it's gonna take to complete that construction. Those are phases 3 and 4, or excuse me, contracts 3 and 4, correct?
Correct. Well, contract 2 and 3 are east of Parkers River. Those are the ones we're finishing up now and will be bidding in the next couple
I
of
see,
months.
they're all 3 here.
Contract 4 is it coincides with MassDOT intersection project at the Route 28 North Main Street, Old Main Street intersection and the Bass River Bridge. Contract 5 is the western portion of Route 28 from Barnstable to Parkers River.
Sorry to confuse those.
Yeah, we've scrambled around to make them confusing for you, but yes, those are all phase one. As you get away from 28, then, as you said, those are
Understood. I
phases
just-
2 and
yeah,
3 and beyond.
I just want to make sure we're not lumping everybody into 2026, because some of those contracts aren't even going to start until 2026. So let's just leave it at that for the moment. While we're at cost discussion, is this presentation been made to the Board of Selectmen?
Yes.
And is there a point at which they would like this committee to interact with them, other than sort of general communication?
No, I should think that we would benefit tremendously from having meetings and discussions between now and town meeting. So
So would it be fair to say you're going to be going into town warrant discussions in the next few weeks, and you'll probably be scheduling articles by article
yes,
agenda items for the selectmen? One of these warrant articles will be this financing, and that would be the point in time where this committee would get together with the selectmen?
yes.
Fair enough. Any other questions regarding costs as they've been presented to date? Moving on, neighborhood meetings. We left this meeting last time with the notion that we were going to attempt to have at least one other neighborhood meeting, taking up on the offer for the senior center to host the one again. They have the facility, the location, the ability to handle a large number. They actually have the technology too, which I was impressed by. So I've been in touch with them to schedule for the week of March 20th. They're going to get back to us on what that would look like against their current schedule, whether it's that Monday or later. It really is up to them. We need their Great Hall, and I'm sure they have other stuff that they were planning to do before they got our request. I understand we have a communications consultant, or the town has a communications consultant, and she should be involved in this process, but can we get a sense of what her availability is?
Yeah, we have, there's a full communication team that has been working on, the appropriate information that we need to get out to the public. I mean, as we all know, it's been very difficult with our local newspaper having shut down last year. So we're making some major efforts at highlighting how to get information better out to the public. And I think that a good portion of that is to talk about our outreach and community meetings. I know we have the senior center one coming up. Whether we do some neighborhood organizations, again, is worth discussing. And we have set up a meeting of just the communications piece for this Thursday at 3. And Spiro, I was wondering, as you've been sort of our leader on the community meetings, if, I don't know what your schedule is like, but if you'd be available to attend either this meeting Thursday or very next one. I'd like to involve, directly with our team and the consultant to go over the best way, like, are we gonna introduce panels now with different people handling different parts of it? Is there, like what is the best information that we need to get in people's hands? And all of the other issues that you've been confronting as you have gone throughout the community, making the presentations. So we're gonna be meeting at the chamber office Thursday at 3, so I wanna just give you a formal invitation to that, and I think that'd be a good starting point to plan for what other, forums that we're gonna be doing.
Very appropriate, especially having spent so many years at a chamber, that they're willing to host a meeting like that. Does that include their involvement?
Yeah, and, it's been a good team-building exercise for us. I'm very mindful of the fact that Phase 1 primarily is the commercial corridor. There are a lot of residences, but clearly that Route 28 commercial corridor, and, there's a lot of questions that the business community has as well. So involving them in the communications piece helps us identify the type of information that businesses are interested in, and information that they need to have. So we've been very just happy to have the business community helping participate in identifying, what information is most important.
Very appropriate, it's the way it should be, usually.
Is it too, somebody sent out we talked about 2 at our meeting, but somebody sent out an invitation that reached me that says 3. Maybe that was a mistake. See, this is the invite I got, 3 to 4.
Oh, okay.
Now, I don't know if that was because they couldn't make it at,
We'll have to get that out.
so I'll confirm that it's at 3 and not at 2, and if there's any change, I'll,
Fair enough. I mean, I would,
right? Didn't the invitation say 3? And now, I'm assuming that's not a mistake, but
Okay, so-
we did talk about,
before we get too detailed on this, there'll be some additional communication about the 16th, whether it's 2 or 3 o'clock. Under whose auspices is this meeting being held?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
So,
16th?
this Thursday's the 16th.
Okay.
I assume it's this Thursday.
This is a meeting I'm holding.
Okay, so it's at the discretion of the town manager, we'll call it at the moment, right? I mean, I don't want to be making public meeting faux pas in the process, because basically holding a meeting of staff and personnel of the town of Yarmouth.
Right. It's primarily our staff to talk about how we can help share information with the community.
Okay.
So I think it'd be fine if the chairman attended, but we would have to post it if the whole committee attended.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of afraid of. My next statement was going to be, we should probably allow other board members to attend if they like to, but then you start bumping into quorum and public meeting issues, which is not conducive to having a staff meeting, basically, at this point. Okay.
In Spiro, just to mention a couple other meetings that we're looking at, I've been talking with Bruce about when the best time to get before the Board of Health is on the wastewater topic prior to town meeting. We're thinking maybe the 6th or potentially the 20th. but we don't want to conflict with other meetings going on, so we'll need to kind of work on that. What were you thinking, Bruce?
20th.
The 20th,
That'll
okay.
give you more time to prepare for a larger, we're figuring at least an hour and a half meeting with the Board of Health. Slides, presentation, we want to concentrate one meeting with it.
So while we're on the subject, I was looking at our schedule, which seems to have moved off the first Monday of the month, which is typically Board of Health meeting. Do you also meet the third Monday of the month? Is that true? So rather than have on the off chance that the senior center would like to do this on the 20th, probably 6 half dozen the other, that we do the Board of Health meeting on the 20th, and then schedule a public neighborhood meeting someday other than the 20th. your meetings are televised,
Yes.
so we're already in the public domain with that one. And to Bob's point a minute ago, I was going to suggest that as much as we like holding meetings where people will come together and can come to a location and ask questions, the number of people who probably will follow on television is even greater, especially if we tape it and run it again. So we should probably plan a virtual get-together as well as an in-person one. We've hit the hotspots in town between the Realtors conference room, the meeting room on the north side, the cultural center. So just revisiting those locales isn't necessarily going to increase our numbers as much as publicizing our availability on a virtual meeting. Anybody like to participate in that fashion? And well, let's explore that possibility at this meeting on the 16th.
And one more meeting, not to keep filling up with meetings here, but these are all important. The Conservation Commission meeting on March the 2nd is specifically targeted for the permits that the collection system needs. But it would also be very helpful to have a general presentation in advance of that, just to bring them up to speed. I know that, one of your members is a member of the Conservation Commission as well, and I'm sure has been doing a great job with keeping them in the loop. But, given that this project is moving very quickly, we want to give kind of the same general overview presentation that the Board of Health would get for the Conservation Commission. So I believe that Brittany's put us on first on the agenda for that meeting as well, to give an overview and then transition into the permits that you need, Mike.
We're just trying to look at what that format would be and, PowerPoint, slides, funding, and
Right.
how that's going to develop. That Jeff and I has talked a couple times, but we want to make sure we're covering a whole meeting. We're going to dedicate one meeting just for wastewater. So presentation, and if people want to come, we can have a Q&A at the end. But we just want to know how much you want us to present.
And we have a pretty good presentation from last fall when we talked about wastewater generally. We'll probably want to tweak it and target it with more specific information depending on what the Board of Health might be interested in, what Conservation might be interested in, financing, maybe a little piece of that too. So
And one area the Board of Health will concentrate on is the time frame that people have to hook up once that pipe goes past their house. The Board of Health took a position, surprisingly, 17 years ago, and voted in '06 when we were discussing it, and basically gave everybody, a 5-year time frame. If it went by your house, you've got something. If you spent at least $6,000 putting the system in, which was cheap back then.
Well, rather than dive into that specific piece of information, let's just make sure we exercise it while we're there. It just seems like it's a really good conversation starter.
Oh.
You are going to bump into practical issues
Yep.
with that time frame, financial issues for the homeowners, property owners, but I'm not sure that the town can wait
No, we
that
can't.
length of time for people to hook
And
up.
gas was 25 cents a gallon.
That's it, so.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to dive into it, so I'm going to leave it at that.
But it's a good question. We need to have it out there, because I think one of the towns is 1 or 2 years, but then they have a hardship provision, and everybody's coming in with a hard position.
Chatham was 2 years, and
But they have
it
is
did
it
have a
Chatham
case by
has-
case. hard
Yeah.
case.
Chatham and Harwich are both 2 years. I
Yeah.
believe.
And that's, you can't turn on the lights unless you got customers.
Right.
So we need the customers too, to be able to run the plant.
I think most of the commercial you're gonna see wanna go in.
I think they're going to be more anxious or eager to do it, but at the same time, there are fewer numbers, and surprisingly, flow is not sufficient to run a plant. So we're going to need those neighborhoods pretty quickly after those connections to run the plant. Since we're on the calendar, if we don't mind skipping ahead to future meeting dates for this committee, do we need to meet 2 weeks from now? We kind of kept it as a possibility in case we needed to.
I don't know that we need to. I think that's going to be, very similar updates. I will say that I was told before the meeting that the 13th, this room is available, March 13th. So if that's, February being a short month, that's, 4 weeks from today.
Yeah, so that's where I was heading. If we're not coming back in 2 weeks, we'll definitely coming back in 4 weeks, March 13th.
Sounds good.
And then things happen really quickly thereafter. Back to the agenda. By the way, we have 3 board members online. Did anybody want to come back 2 weeks from now before we walked away from it completely?
Seeing a bunch of no's.
Not really.
Okay. So, is Friends of the Bass River in the house? Okay, so we can, we're not going to hear from them tonight. Only thing left on the agenda, unless somebody wants to
I have one,
bring up a point.
I have one point to bring up. Probably everybody saw in yesterday's paper, it's the front page, for the last section, APC had a big spread on why we need to go forward with wastewater. I can pass it around, but it's, obviously they paid a lot of money, so. And they said, it's a question and answer, and what they're saying is it's not too expensive because the towns have plenty of money, 0 interest loans, federal money, local money, that should not be a question at all. That's their number 1 response, so.
I think that was those were the local public interest groups
Yeah.
that we were talking about. I mean, it's great that they're not only speaking for the town governments, but they're interpreting all the lies that we make, so, very helpful.
But, I mean, this is a big sheet they put on,
Well,
So these are the questions that people will come back with.
Loved the Cape Cod Times, loved it when it was around. But you gotta question people's judgment who are taking out full-page ads in the Cape Cod Times these days.
Yeah.
Any further points before the last item, which is meeting notes? Is it the pleasure of the board that we take up the previous meetings minutes for approval? We got 5.
Yes.
You guys ready to do that?
Yes.
You should have in your possession meeting notes from December 6th. Excuse me, December 5th.
Fifth.
Any comments on those? Seeing none, I have one. I'm going to read you the sentence because I'm not sure everybody's got this or will have access to it immediately. Under cost discussion, new numbers come out in January. 7.5% could be $500,000. Funds would be spread over the years. I mean, we're tending to do our minutes in shorthand, which is fine. It's just, I'm not sure that 7.5 was the right number for this discussion. I think it may have been 1.5, but I didn't want the record to reflect numbers that somebody's going to come back at us with in the future.
I believe that relates to the percentage for debt forgiveness. It probably should be reworded slightly, but our debt forgiveness when the draft intended use plan came out was 6.6%. I think there was a number that we were using at 1.5 that we were hoping was going to be, I'm sorry, that we thought was going to be 7.5, but
7.5% of the cost of the project. Is that what you're talking about?
At that time, I think 7.5 was thought to be a potential number. But when the intended use plan came out, it was verified that Yarmouth's number would be 6.6 for the debt forgiveness. So that is what that's referencing.
Since you know what we're talking about here, you comfortable with this 7.5?
Yes, I think the wording could be tweaked slightly, but yes.
No problem.
The reference to debt forgiveness should be in there.
So, as long as, at least I understand what that meant. I had the question. Anybody else on these meeting notes? A motion? Anyone care to make a motion to accept these minutes?
So moved.
I move that we accept the minutes of the RAC meeting 12/5/22.
Mary, motions, John seconds, all in favor. Let's start with Lee,
Aye.
Mary, George, John,
Aye.
and myself, 5. Next meeting notes are January. That would be the last ones. We have 3, actually. January 9th, I believe. I put them out somewhere here. Sure you all had. Would you like to be recognized, Lee? Your microphone's on.
You need a copy of those? Spiro?
I'm sure I got them, just,
There's one, yeah, there's one.
I'm not pulling them up here. I have them as the 9th of January as well.
30.
So, anyone have questions on the minutes for the 9th of January? The corrections? Motion to accept. Mary motions to accept. Motion to second. John motions to second. All in favor? Lee?
Aye.
Mary? George?
Aye.
John? And myself, all in favor. Meeting minutes for January 30th. You should have them most recently, and they're available for our disposal tonight. Any comments on those? I would like to make a suggestion that there are several typos in this one, and I don't want to get hung up on spelling. So if it's okay with the committee, I was just going to email. These come from Lori?
Mary would be the best one to email.
I'll just email you where the typos are, but other than that, the substance is okay with me. Anybody else? Motion to accept?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. The roll, Lee, to accept?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And myself, I'll say yay. 5 votes to accept the minutes. That catches us up for all our meeting notes. Thank you very much. We'll expect there to be a meeting on March 13th. In the meantime, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Lee?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
John? And myself, we are adjourned. Thank you for